Okay, I think the trickle of people is starting to slow, so I'm going to kick us off here. So thank you everyone for joining today. I'm Alan Cohn. I'm joined by Pinar Balsi and Erin Mori from New York City Department of Environmental Protection. We are very excited to welcome Asia Jackson from Los Angeles to talk about their One Water journey. And Pinar will introduce Asia in just a minute. If I can please ask everyone to mute yourselves and to keep your video off, that will help things today. So please, again, mute yourself and keep yourself on mute throughout the presentation. Just a reminder, a couple of housekeeping items. The webinar is being recorded today. And again, all participants must be muted, which will help us. Sorry, let me just fix that. All right, so which will help us with the recording, and we will plan to post the recording on our website after the presentation today. So we will share a link for how to access that. If you have questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to type them in the chat box, and we will do our best to take your questions for Asia at the end of the meeting. When you pose a question, please introduce yourself and your affiliation if possible. And then finally, we'll offer a survey at the end of the meeting where you'll have a chance to provide your feedback on what a One Water framework might look like for New York City. Finally, if the webinar cuts out abruptly due to technology issues, please bear with us, and we'll do our best to reconnect. And with that, I will turn it over to Pinar Balsi to provide our welcoming remarks. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, Alan, and hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Before I introduce our wonderful guest, Asia, all the way from LA, I want to give you a brief background on why we embarked on this very new One Water initiative at DEP. Next slide, please. So, many of you know we are a water wastewater utility, but we do also oversee stormwater management in the city. And as many of you know, we implement the largest green infrastructure program in the nation. So driver for One Water differs regionally, but One Water LA is driven by water scarcity, which Asia is going to explain more. But in New York City, our driver is having too much water and more frequently in a short period of time, as we all experience with Stormwater. I think the next slide is going to cover that. Where we are really aiming is the One Water NYC plan. We would like to bring this more holistic water management approach and meet the multiple objectives that we are all striking towards. So one of the most objectives that we want to really cover under this One NYC plan is the equity and affordability. We also want to look at water quality improvements, infrastructure resiliency, as well as reliability. Climate resiliency is another objective, as well as the workforce and sustainability. So there's a lot on our plate, and it's a daunting task, but what we want to accomplish through these workshop series and more meeting with you in person and our interagency partners is really to refine these objectives, focus on what we would like to cover, and scope the One Water NYC plan together. So please stay tuned on this effort as we are going to come back to you in the upcoming months. So, one good news is, which we captured on the next slide is, we are not going to start from scratch. So although it is a daunting task to put this One NYC plan together, we really have a lot of initiatives and efforts and programs, as you all know, implemented working with you. So we started all the way in 1993 up until now, that there are multiple documents and efforts that we put together. We worked very closely with you all and our interagency partners. So we are going to leverage all these efforts and really put all the pieces together to build this One Water holistic water management effort together. So we know I don't want to take too much of time because I think I can take the whole 1 hour to talk about the One NYC because we are very excited to work with you all. But I want to introduce our wonderful guest speaker, Miss Asia Jackson. Asia is an environmental engineer with 16 years of experience in LA sanitation and environment. She has worked on stormwater, wastewater, integrated water approaches to manage the city's watersheds, water resources, and water facilities. Asia also led the One Water LA, which we are going to be talking today, which is a collaborative integrated approach to managing the city's waters. Asia is currently working on sustainability, climate resiliency projects to get the city to 100% reuse of wastewater at water treatment plants. Originally from Merced, California, Asia graduated from the University of Southern California with a degree in civil engineering, and she is a registered civil engineer in California. So with that said, I would like to welcome Asia and hear about the wonderful One Water LA 2040 plan together.
All right, thank you for the introduction, Pinar, and thank you for having me. So with that, I will talk about the One Water LA journey. I'm actually not a native of LA, and I see I'm not the only one here from LA. So so I see you there, Jack. Be nice to me, please. So we'll continue on. Next slide, please, Alan. So the One Water LA process was looking at different things to manage our water. So looking at it in an integrated and sustainable manner, engaging the communities and leveraging the partnerships that we have with the neighborhoods, as well as maximizing value for our infrastructure investments. Next slide. So these were the drivers for One Water LA. As Pinar was saying, even though our differences are, we were looking at water scarcity, but I'm sure we do share some things in common in that we have climate extremes, as well as aging infrastructure. In Los Angeles, 90% of our water at the start of this process was imported. So we're looking at reducing that reliance on imported water. Next slide. But even before we started the One Water LA process, we actually started this a long time ago in 1999 when we developed the Integrated Resources Plan. That plan had a planning horizon of 2020. So realizing we were getting closer to 2020 planning horizon, we started a new IRP process, which is the One Water LA plan, which was split into 2 phases. The first phase laid the groundwork, and the second phase developed the One Water LA plan, which goes to a new planning horizon of 2040. Next slide, please. So for the One Water LA plan, as Pinar had mentioned, our vision statement is a collaborative approach to develop an integrated framework for managing the city's water resources, watersheds, and water facilities in an environmentally, economically, and socially beneficial manner. One Water LA will lead to smarter land use practices, healthier watersheds, greater reliability of our water and wastewater systems, increased efficiency and operation of our utilities, enhanced livable communities, resilience against climate change, and protection of public health. Next slide. The One Water LA objectives were developed with clear and easily understood terms and terminology. It was accompanied by guiding principles, and all of this was developed in collaboration with stakeholders and provided a picture of success from beginning to end. It was entirely a stakeholder input process. Next slide. And these are the objectives that were developed. So you'll see that they involve triple bottom line, as well as managing water. And there's also a community aspect as well for community awareness and advocacy. Next slide. So the One Water LA plan developed from the 2006 IRP, but it also involved the LA Sustainable City Plan, which was the Mayor Garcetti, which championed the work that we do for One Water LA. And the One Water LA plan actually informed the mayor's staff and for his sustainable city plan to develop it into the Green New Deal, which is the second iteration of the city plan, to develop these milestones and goals below. So you see that includes sourcing 70% of our water locally by 2035, capturing more stormwater, reducing the purchase of imported water by 2025, and stormwater quality as well. In Los Angeles, we have the TMDLs already in effect here. So we are looking at improving our beach water quality as well. And as the one that was mentioned in the intro of 100% reuse of our wastewater, that's one that's also been developed as a result of the planning efforts from Water LA. Next slide. And our stakeholders, we didn't want to just throw them in one group. So we had many different interactions with our stakeholders. So we have our steering committee, which I'll go into in a bit, which is our different city departments. We have our strategic planning group. Because in LA, our wastewater and our drinking water is two different utilities. So it's One Water LA is co-led for us. We also have our special topic groups, a lot of stakeholder workshops and focus meetings for different stakeholders, and our advisory group, which was essential to developing the One Water LA plan. Next slide. So our steering committee, we had 14 city departments and 6 regional agencies. The 2 that are bolded is LA San, that I'm from, and Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. So we co-managed all of the different work efforts throughout the plan, and it just speaks to the amount of planning and integration that we did for the One Water plan. Next slide. Our advisory group provided that stakeholder perspective, and I see you do have a couple members of our advisory group on here. But as you can see from the different representations of our advisory group, it represents neighborhood councils, it represents environmental community groups, even hospitals. So you see it represents diverse points of view, geographical diversity, and organizational diversity to make sure we reach all portions of our stakeholder perspective. Even when we didn't have, we expanded it from 7 to 10. So even in the second phase, we realized we needed additional input. Next slide. So with the stakeholder engagement and public engagement, we didn't just have our workshops. We also attended just about every event we could to spread the news of One Water LA. And we also had different touch points with students and teachers to help share the One Water LA vision and guidelines and what we're thinking of doing. And we also developed a school curriculum that is used by the school districts here to teach about integrated water. Next slide. So this is just some of the numbers that we have from doing this process. Over 60 presentations and discussions with neighborhood councils, the 5 special topic groups here that was developed in collaboration with our advisory group. But you can see it represents different areas of focus for community input, from partnerships to cost benefit analysis and outreach. And 30 member steering committee, and also we had a lot of stakeholder and advisory group meetings. So you can see through this process, it was very involved. Next slide. So here are the different elements of the One Water LA plan, which I'll go into in a second here. You see that includes policies and programs, as well as the wastewater facility plan, and as well as current and future integration opportunities. The one difference that we have from the IRP to the One Water LA plan is we started to include our climate resiliency aspects. Next slide. So for our wastewater facility plan, it included treatment plant upgrades. So in Los Angeles, we have 4 water reclamation plants. Hyperion is our largest, are the one at the top of our system. So 3 of these plants involve advanced water treatment upgrades that we're planning to do right now. So the One Water LA planning process helped inform how large those advanced treatment processes are going to be. It also includes capital improvement projects for all of our plants, rehab and replacement, and wastewater conveyance projects. So we looked at all of these in the One Water LA planning process, so that no stone was unturned in that sense of things. So we reviewed all of our existing plans, and we also looked at our future plans to see where we can make improvements. Next slide. For our stormwater and urban runoff facility plan, we used a 3-legged stool approach. So for that approach, we looked at flood risk mitigation, water quality improvements, and water supply augmentation. For us, similar to everything that you guys have done, this includes looking at our previous plans. So for us, that included looking at our past wastewater facility plan, that included stormwater to sewer diversions. It involved looking at our flood risk mitigation plans. It also involved looking at our TMDL compliance and regulatory plans. And from those plans, we were able to split it into 3 different areas. So that included distributed green infrastructure projects, regional green, and regional gray infrastructure projects to develop a new stormwater integrated project database. So as you can see, quite a few of the projects identified were distributed as opposed to having a regional distribution for stormwater. Next slide. So for our policies and programs, we had 8 different categories. And those categories included stormwater and urban runoff, training and education, funding and partnerships, as well as sustainability and climate change. With those 39 policies and program recommendations that were developed with stakeholders, these are the 3 top departmental integration policies. So that includes maximizing city-owned property for stormwater capture retrofits, and creating a citywide database for stormwater management and for multi-benefit projects. Next slide. In regards to future integration opportunities, there are 8 recommended strategies. In the beginning, we actually had 9 recommended strategies, or 9 strategies that we looked at. The one that was eliminated through the One Water LA process and planning was actually desalination for us. And it's just because it was too energy intensive and the cost of it is extremely high. So with the stakeholder input and the special topic groups, we were able to eliminate desalination as an option. So we move forward with 8 recommended strategies that you see range from potable reuse to LA River storage and use, low flow diversions, and stormwater BMPs. We eventually got to 27 concept options. One interesting thing that sort of came up in our stakeholder groups, and that's because the mayor came to New York, was that they wanted us to look at putting a floating park on the river, but our river is dry compared to the waterways of New York. So it's an interesting nexus in that someone visiting New York thought of an idea that could potentially work in LA. Next slide. For climate resilient infrastructure, we looked at climate risk from 81 facilities. And those risks included temperature, high winds, tsunami, precipitation, and sea level rise. So the 81 facilities were not just our water reclamation plants, that included all of our conveyance system, including our pumping plants, our storm to sewer, low flow diversions, and future facilities. From those assessments, we were able to look at recommendations for management practices and design practices improvements that can be integrated into our CIPs at the beginning, as opposed to doing a retrofit. Next slide. This is the evaluation criteria that we use for the 27 concept options. This evaluation criteria was developed with stakeholder input. And from that stakeholder input, we came up with these 4 specific boxes of criteria, from economic, implementation, resiliency, and environmental criteria. This was all developed with our advisory group and stakeholder advisory council and stakeholders. One thing I will say is that we then ranked these criteria as from a city perspective, so city staff ranking what's important, and from a stakeholder perspective, what they felt was important. And we were within 1 to 2 points of each other in terms of what we valued as important. So that shows really with this process that in the beginning, we may have had opposing views, but throughout the One Water LA process, we were able to become in sync with what's important to all of us in the city. Next slide. For our portfolio evaluation process, we had the 27 projects and programs that went through screening and evaluation criteria, and to eventually get to themed project portfolios, where they then went through an additional evaluation and to eventually get to our recommended implementation strategy to help us with the mayor's goals of sourcing more water locally. Next slide. So here is the themed project portfolios. As you can see that there is the benchmark portfolio, or the do nothing portfolio that served as a base. But we also had our other 4 portfolios that were developed to look at minimizing costs, maximizing environmental benefits, maximizing institutional collaboration, and maximizing local supplies of water. Next slide. So from here, you see that our concept options are duplicative in some of the different portfolios, so that we notice that theme to get to our preferred portfolio. But you see, we also changed the base on our portfolio because we realized some of these projects were too important to not have as part of our base. So those included those that were required for stormwater compliance for our TMDLs, as well as other regional projects that were going on at the time that we realized that it needs to be comprehensive and included in every portfolio. Next slide. So for our preferred portfolio, we use a mass balance tool to then look at making our portfolio adaptive. So that way we're not planning for one future scenario, we're planning for any plausible future scenarios. And those scenarios were a normal, a wet, and dry year situation for our future portfolio analysis. It was the average of a 10-year weather cycle. So when I say normal, it's a mixture of normal, wet, and dry in that scenario. It's just a majority of them are normal rain season, and the other 2 are predominantly wet or predominantly dry in a 10-year cycle. From there, we were able to see what projects floated to the top in terms of making us meet the mayor's goals to get to our preferred portfolio. Next slide. So here is our preferred portfolio. It consists of 6 projects that totaled 147,000 acre feet per year. The 3 categories that these projects fit in included low flow diversions and LA River storage and use, potable reuse, and flow management. For our system, it was important to get as much water as possible to the top of our system, to help us control what we do with it from there in terms of is it better for us to store it in the aquifer, or do we need more water for recycling and reuse? But I'm sure for you guys it may look different, but we took that into account in looking at our preferred portfolio. Next slide. And this is also part of the adaptability, as we have to prepare for our what if situations in terms of what if regulations change and that we can no longer discharge to the ocean. What if potable reuse regulation framework changes? What if water rights and institutional agreements are possible? So this is what we looked at for all of our different facilities. So on the next slide, we're going to go into one of the facility at the top of our system, which is the Donald C. Tillman Water Reclamation Plant. So we look at a decision to implement flow management projects. If we're behind on meeting the mayor's goals and we need additional flows, what flow management projects are needed? We also look at what is the barrier to some projects. So if the regulation changes for treated water augmentation regulations for us, what projects can we put online for our facility? So you see, it gives us a future path forward so that we still, even though all the projects have the same volume yielded, the cost is different. So it gives us a scenario of options for the future. Next slide. But the One Water LA plan, with all of its parts, comes to the tune of $13.3 billion. A lot of people see that as sticker shock, but as you can see, and I'm sure similar to the efforts you guys will be going through, it's comprehensive of pre-existing plans. So it includes our watershed plans, our wastewater facility plans, our rehab and replacement program plans. All those plans and strategies and projects are incorporated into One Water LA, but it's managed differently. So we're looking at it from that integrated perspective of how we can maximize the projects. So from the $13.3 billion identified in the One Water LA plan, only $4.5 billion is new projects and programs. So that's only 34% of it is new. It's just reorganizing and re-strategizing previously identified projects to maximize benefit. Next slide. But the One Water LA plan also, and the IRP also helped with getting funding. So from the IRP, when that was done in 1996, when it was started to the end, it helped inform stakeholders about our Proposition O, which was our first effort to improve stormwater funding. For us, stormwater is not a regulated utility in California. So that helped us get funding for our stormwater projects, which passed in 2004 by 76.3%. And that had to pass by 75% of homeowners, of property owners. So it passed by 76 in order to pass. Another recent one we did was for yes on local parks. So that was Measure A. That was for multi-benefit for parks, beaches, and water conservation. And that passed in 2016 by 75%. And the one that really helped inform us the most was the Measure W, which was the Safe Clean Water that just recently passed. And that passed by 66.7 because that one went to a general ballot. So that was 50% plus one of all voters had to approve that one. And our stormwater facility plan actually helped inform the decision-making on that, as residents found out how much they were not paying for stormwater. So we were able to use our stakeholder meetings to inform everyone about stormwater, how it's funded, operation and maintenance that was lacking and whatnot to help that measure pass. Next slide. So beyond the One Water plan, we're incorporating into our CIPs resiliency, climate adaptation, and environmental justice. So we're really looking at this to continue our interdepartmental steering committee, also continuing our collaboration with departments and regional agencies, as well as continuing our stakeholder engagement through workshops and implementation and subcommittees. And I thank you for inviting me to speak today, and I'm welcome to your questions.
Great, thank you, Asia. So just a reminder, folks asking questions, if you could please put them in the chat, and if possible, include your name and affiliation. And Aaron and I will jump in now to facilitate some of the Q&A. So why don't we start with the first question I see here from Gemma Dunn. She says, great presentation, Asia. You made a key point regarding the transition from stakeholders having opposing views to becoming more in sync with one another, having greater alignment. Can you elaborate on this? What are your key lessons learned from this experience? Any tips you would share with other jurisdictions embarking on a One Water journey on how to build cohesion and support amongst diverse stakeholders?
So one of the things I will say is that from a engineering perspective is to get out of your comfort zone. In that sense of engineers are very good at being at the desk, not interacting with stakeholders. So all of my team was at the workshops. All of my team was interacting with stakeholders. And getting the feedback and input. So you're going to get out of it what you put into it. So you have to be very receptive of hearing everything, including if it's not directly related to you. We developed a parking lot for all of our ideas, or everything that we heard, and we took account of everything, whether writing it down, involving it in stakeholder meeting notes. And we also had our advisory group that helped in support of informing stakeholders as well. And we also use our advisory group as a pre-meeting to advise us on what we were doing right and what we were doing wrong and what needed additional help.
I see that Jack from Los Angeles has his hands up. I believe you work together. Jack, do you want to chime in?
I was a member of the advisory group, and I'm pretty much of a no bird with regards to any increases in taxes and all that kind of stuff. On the other hand, I have to compliment, and I had to compliment ASA and all the other people from sanitation and DWP. They spend an inordinate amount of time with us, responding to all sorts of dumb questions, loaded questions. And I think, from my perspective, they did a very good job of turning this no bird into sort of a semi-yes bird. But I think, it took a lot of time. It took a lot of effort, holding hands with all these various diverse groups. So I guess my word of advice is that you really got to spend time with all the constituencies. Now, LA is probably a lot easier than all you crazy people back in New York City, where I lived for about 10 years. So I think ASA probably had an easier job. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jack.
All right, thank you. Moving on to the next question. This comes from Ibrahim Abdul Mateen, who is former DEP and now a consultant at Green Squash Consulting and a friend to many on this webinar, as he notes. And his question is, please share more about the decisions to not include desalination.
Sure. So actually out here, there's a larger project called Poseidon that's out in San Diego. That's a desalination project that was starting up right about the time we started our One Water Relay process. A lot of people think because of Australia as successes with desalination that it should be approached here in Los Angeles. Through that decision process, we were able to identify what's good and bad about desalination. But we also looked at LA as a region and that we have a lot of polluted water wells, and it's actually cheaper for us to improve, to decontaminate those polluted water wells those legacy pollutants than to invest in desalination for us at this point. But realizing that in California, we don't have desalination regulations yet. We got bit hard a long time ago on using wastewater for groundwater replenishment and a toilet to tap project that made all the headlines. So we've learned our lesson from that, and that we will wait until the regulations come out before designing a project, and realizing that and informing stakeholders. We all agree together that desalination isn't an option for us right now.
Great. So next question is specific to the aqueducts in terms of reducing inefficiencies or increasing efficiency for water transport. Is there anything that you could comment on that, Asia?
Yeah, so that picture that we showed before, that actually was the LA River itself. So that's one of the bridges that spans over the river. The river was concreted a long time ago because without it being concreted, it would, as storms come through, it would rip wildly back and forth. So a majority of our river is concreted. But it's also designed to get the water out from top to bottom as fast as possible. So we could design capture on there, which is one of the things we've started to look at. So we could have something similar to Seattle with their dike system. But that's just in the early stages here, and that involves meeting with a lot of regulators and the regional board here, which we did inform them that we are looking at these water capture systems. So that is definitely a low-hanging fruit that we're looking at, but regulatory wise, it's going to take a long process to develop.
Thank you. And the next question comes from Catherine Skopik of the Sierra Club of New York City group. The question is, how did you start off large community meetings, expert presentations, definition of problems, etc.?
So we actually had a facilitator for our meetings to help navigate that stakeholder-driven process. But we started it out with just even a brainstorm meeting of what is important to the city, but what's important to stakeholders that they feel needs to be covered, and we grew from there. So we realized what's common in our efforts, and what things perhaps we didn't think of that need work, and we went from there, and with our advisory group and with our stakeholders to develop the One Water plan.
Can you talk?
One more thing on that, and part of that, we also structured our meeting. So after that one meeting, we might focus on wastewater. Another meeting, we might focus on stormwater, or working with business and communities that might be affected. So we structured our meetings so that we covered one topic at a time, and eventually had quarterly or check-in meetings to go back to the overall plan.
We have a question from Kendall Christensen about the role of organics management in the One Water system plan, food waste, biosolids, etc. Could you comment on that, Asia?
Which one is that one?
From Kendall Christensen, just about the role of organics management, biosolids, food waste, etc. Does that have a role in the One Water plan?
It does, because for us, our biosolids is actually trucked off to a farm in a nearby county. But that is one of the what if scenarios. What if we're not allowed to do that anymore? The other aspect in regards to food waste, as we looked at it in terms of our odor management of our conveyance system, and looked at ways we can add additional grinders and digesters of food waste to help eliminate sewer odors as well. So we definitely did look at those, as well as rebate programs for commercial and industrial businesses.
Thank you. The next question comes from Vincent Lee of Arup. Do you have nominated champions who will help implement the plan over the next couple of years and continue interdepartmental coordination and community engagement to ensure the objectives are being achieved? As follow-up, who will help to own and shepherd the plan forward?
So we actually do have, in our departments that co-led it, and between my department and Department of Water and Power, the people involved are still there. Some of them have moved on, but the way we see it is that the One Water LA vision and guidelines is very much a change in perspective. So as they move on, the One Water mission and vision continues on with them. And we also bring new people in to work on it. The mayor also developed for us the water cabinet, which is where all the department general managers meet to ensure that they're working on integrated water together. So that way, sometimes things cannot be resolved at the staff level. The mayor makes everyone accountable to make sure they meet the mayor's goals at the general manager level.
So we have a couple of questions coming in about the role of water affordability. First from Vijaya in our group here at DEP. She's wondering if you can share some insights on how water affordability management helps promote environmental justice. And maybe you can start there, but we can also skip ahead to some of the related questions.
Okay.
Later.
Okay, so in regards to water affordability, we started to look at some of our different programs that we have in regards to environmental justice. So for one, for us, certain demographics in the city felt that we need to eliminate the rain barrel rebate. And then other stakeholders, this actually happened in a stakeholder meeting. Other stakeholders felt we need to keep it because in some communities, they're just learning about water conservation. So realizing that we weren't going to get consensus, we allowed a dialogue platform for people to understand that in disadvantaged communities, rain barrels are a gateway BMP for them to start doing additional stormwater improvements like rain gardens and capture devices, and that we needed to keep both programs. But we were able to revise the overall rebate program so it includes not just rain barrels, but cisterns. So we were able to inform other communities of what's going on to include that environmental justice aspect. But it also helped us inform that some of our programs aren't going far enough. So it gave us that flexibility.
Great, thank you, Asia. And now we're going to tag team on just a couple of other related questions that came in. The first from Kate Boycourt, who says, can you speak to the value from the public perspective of rate structure changes versus ballot measures versus other funding measures? Are you shifting how you budget to implement this plan, including the length of the plan? And then from Robert Pirani, we have, can you speak to any challenges and opportunities you see in terms of funding the plan, given the desire to advance broad co-benefits and funding sources from EPA, ratepayers, or elsewhere? So generally, just your thoughts on how best to fund and different funding mechanisms you've looked at.
Sure. So we actually have a couple of projects that are, it's a project package that's funded through the WIFIA loan system, which is the federal system, which that's, the agreements on that take a while. So we've been working on that one and it's almost ready. But realizing that from a future perspective, no city department, no city agency can do water conservation or water capture on its own. We are looking at doing more JPAs, joint power authorities, and that sense of things, or more integrated agreements, interagency agreements. Realizing that as a region together, it also helps inform how the region as a whole is going to start looking at water capture and water savings and that sense of things. So it helped inform not just us, but it helped also start those conversations with other agencies.
Great. Next question I'll take here is from our friend Chris Boyd, formerly of New York City Health Department, specific to cooling towers. So New York City knows the location of its cooling towers, which account for 50% to 80% of total water demand for a building. Los Angeles is developing support programs, but does LA know where they are located? Did you incorporate cooling towers into OneWater at all?
So we didn't incorporate cooling towers into the OneWater plan, but the mayor identified a dewatering group that was part of the mayor's goals. So, and that's the reason why we didn't incorporate it into the OneWater LA plan. So that agency, that group went around looking at ways to reuse our cooling tower water, or to have water reuse for cooling towers. So there's actually a program that looks at ways we can capture stormwater and produce recycled water for the purposes of cooling towers. That's more of a mayor program and is not included in the OneWater LA plan. One thing I'd also like to add is that everything that we've done for the plan is in a short-term, interim, and a long-term planning perspective. So we do have a 10-year, we also have a 15, and then we have the up to 2040, which is a long-term plan in everything that we do, and program-wise as well.
Great, thank you, Asia. The next question comes from Manny Quintella, DEP. So you mentioned that LA developed a school curriculum to teach about integrated water. Can you elaborate a bit more about what this entailed? Did you work with the Board of Education to develop this curriculum? Was this part of the regular school year curriculum for all school grades? Or was this more like a one-time workshop type of educational targeting certain school grades? And finally, what kind of feedback did you get from the students?
So we actually developed a curriculum for multiple school grades. So realizing here, all of our elementary schools, we have one school district, LA Unified School District. So as long as the curriculum met their teaching, criteria, we were able to develop it. We also asked some teachers to provide input while we were developing the curriculum. So we went as young as 4th grade, and we went up to high school. And the picture that we had previously, that was our 4th grade program, our Young Citizen Artist program, where they were challenged with finding a way to capture water. And later on, we started to include climate resiliency and sustainability. Gave them no bounds. We reviewed the projects to make sure they were not developing black water. But young minds will come up with amazing things. And we're actually piloting one of the things that one of the students came up with. So they came up with a radar detection system for the river to see when it floods, so that there's a visual alert that we've been piloting, which is one of the success stories out of it.
Great. Can you talk more? This is a question from Margot Walker, also a former colleague at DEP. Can you talk more about the mass balance tool you used to define your preferred portfolio and how that was developed?
Yes, so we used a proprietary mass balance tool that was called Blue Planet, where we're able to program in all of our facilities. So we programmed in our treatment plants, just about every water source possible, including evaporation rates, to see what we were going to end up in the end. This mass balance tool helped us in that knowing what our future projects were going to be, or what we planned them to be, and the sizes of them, we were then able to, for future scenarios, what if we turn this project on in this year? What's going to happen? What if we can't turn that project on and we have to turn on another one? So we were able to develop different scenarios to help us get to meeting the mayor's goals. And in the mass balance tool, it was set up so that we would meet the mayor's goals, and we would also, what year would we get to 100% reuse?
Great, thank you. And then the next question is about advice. So Asia, what advice do you have for New York City stakeholders as they share their feedback, thoughts, and ideas from OneWater? And then similarly, what advice do you have for New York City as we start developing our vision and framework?
Okay, so I will start with New York City, just because that one's an easier one to say, is that with any stakeholder process, there's the gambit of going too far. There's this chart about, how far do you want to engage stakeholders? Do you just want to inform? Do you want to empower? I forget what that chart's name is, but how far do you want to go with management in terms of how much stakeholder input you have? So there's a fine line to that, in that it no longer becomes the city's, it becomes the stakeholders' efforts. In terms of the stakeholders, it's on both sides involves a lot of trust, but for stakeholders, I think in knowing who's working on it, it provides that instead of just the people at the top, but they have that interaction with who's actually working on it, you'll start to see that there is genuineness in everything that's being done, and that everyone is trying to get to the same goal. So you may start out with very opinionated views. In the end, and you can tell from Jack here, you will get to being able to sit down and have actual conversations where people will approach you and say, hey, I noticed this problem. I know what you do. Can you take a look at this? What is your thoughts on this? So you'll eventually get to a very civil discourse that you're able to know them a little bit more personally, and that will help going forward for everything that you do.
Great. So I think we have time probably for 2 more, and then just folks that are listening, please don't forget to fill out the survey. We'll put a link in the chat, and then we'll send more information after the webinar. So from Catherine Skopik, what is the time frame? When did you begin, and when did you do you conclude? What plans do you have for continuance and ongoing monitoring of success, etc.?
Sure. So the OneWater LA plan actually started in 2013 with the first phase, and that was the vision and guiding principles to go forward. So that laid the groundwork for everything going forward. I actually came on to the OneWater plan in phase 2, which was actually developing the plan. So that started in 2015, and we finished the work that we were doing for the OneWater LA plan in 2018. So with that, it was about a 3-year process. And then from there, we've been going forward with developing everything that's in that plan. So I'm sure you've heard the new terminology of zero wasted water in Los Angeles. So our OneWater LA is now transitioning to the zero wasted water. 1 wasn't enough, so now we're at 0. So with that, we're now having this focus as a result of everything identified in the plan to 100% reuse of wastewater. And that's not just from the plan's perspective, but that's also from the mayor's perspective. So the mayor has now termed it to zero wasted water that we're moving forward.
Great, and that's actually a great segue to our final question for you, Asia, which is, can you speak to the importance of having mayoral support for implementing OneWater LA? And I think you've spoken a little bit about this today, but what is Mayor Garcetti's role?
So the mayor's role in this is to make sure everyone is, in terms of everyone, I'm not saying just city departments, but to make sure everyone is NGOs, everyone who's a partner in Los Angeles is aware of everything that we're doing on this, but also to show that there's this, with the water cabinet that he established to make sure we're meeting this goal. So there's different touch points and the water cabinet for the different departments, but there's also city council that also ensures with their districts that that there's water capture. So that helps put that in that perspective, but it also helps us see that we're getting these projects done, not just in the low-hanging fruit areas, but also, and so that no community is left behind in terms of water capture and integrated water projects.
Well, thank you so much, Asia. We're running out of time here, unfortunately, but we do want to keep the dialogue going. We will take questions if you want to contact anyone who wants to contact us by email with follow-up questions for Asia. But we'll also be very interested to hear takeaways from people in terms of the next steps for New York City and what OneWater could mean here. Erin, thank you, just posted a link to our post-webinar survey, and that will help us understand some of what I was just discussing, which is now that you've heard from Asia, we'd really like to hear from everyone about what OneWater might mean to us here as New York City stakeholders. So please be sure to take the survey and visit our website for more details and contact us at the email address. As we continue on this journey, we plan to have more informational and learning webinars. So we have email addresses for those of you that signed up, but again, if you would like to reach out to us, please do so. And please provide your contact information so that we can be sure to invite you to the next webinar if we don't already have it. So again, thank you everyone for joining. Very special thank you to Asia for your presentation and for fielding so many questions. And we really look forward to working both with our stakeholders and with peers like you, Asia, as we begin our journey. So thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your day.